Hello everyone. Sorry I've not uploaded too much recently. I'm quite unwell at the minute. Let me know in the comments who you'd like to see me work with. Thank you for all the suggestions last time. I've started making a list. And now, for these campfire stories. A long time ago, I used to scuba dive with my college buddies. It's my passion. It made me feel like an intrepid explorer, charting the unknown, discovering the unseen. That was before my child, way before my ex-wife. Like so many things, I gave up when I started my family. After Penny was born, scuba was just the odd thing I would do, not my main focus. Now 12 years later, I started looking at the world as though I'd never seen it before. I could resume the activities and hobbies I'd abandoned. Scuba diving was at the top of the list. Once everything was finalized, I bought a house 2 states away from the one I'd share with my wife and daughter. It's nothing special. It wasn't the house I cared about when I closed the deal on the property. It was what sat behind it, a lake. The lake behind the home is huge. Not exactly Loch Ness, but nevertheless impressive. When I told the relator I was into diving, she told me if I looked hard enough, I'd probably find somewhere with old Indian artifacts. That's all well and good. I just wanted to be underwater again. I felt like it might bring some peace to me after such circumstances. The first time I went out, I was dismayed by the amount of slit impeding my vision. It was like I'd been trapped in a brown fog. I got discouraged and quit after only 15 minutes. But I resolved to give it another go. I was glad I persevered. The next dive was beautiful. I guess the heavy rain from the night before the initial dive had been the reason for all the silt. Because it had settled now, the water is crystal clear, and I could see for what felt like miles around me. I swam around and explored. The lake was exceedingly deep. When I brought the place, I asked the relator if she knew how far it went down. She estimated it's 900 feet. I didn't believe her until I saw it. Now the drop was immensely steep. Staggering. I knew my equipment couldn't handle the full depth of the lake, but I'd be goddamned if I didn't try and see as much as possible. That was how I spent the summer. I'd work from home like normal until the market closed at 4. As soon as the closing bell rang, I was outside the door into water. I'd been keeping track of the areas I'd explored on a rudimentary map I'd drawn up on my computer. On the fateful Wednesday in late June, the only area I'd yet to explore in the green zone nearest to the pier was the drop-off itself. To be honest, I'd been avoiding it. There was something about it. This may sound a little weird coming from a man in his late 40s, but I'd held off from exploring that section because the dreams I had after my first dive. In my dream, I'm underwater. Now it's not unusual for me to be like that in my dreams. Normally, the sensation is freeing. I float and bob in the currents, enjoying weightlessness and the bliss. I should tell you this is not my normal dream. The dream begins with me standing on the edge of my pier. The sky is black, but everything else is bright enough for me to see without any problem. I then look down to where I'd normally see water, and the lake is empty, or at least it appears that way. Something causes me to lose my balance and I tumble off the pier. I scream, expecting the crash of the rocks below. Instead, I float. The water's invisible. I bob on the surface for a moment now, not really too sure of what's happening. But something unseeable wraps around my legs. I gasp in a lungful of air, torn below the surface. I fight against whatever the force is, but it's hopeless. I get carried down. To my eyes, it looks like I'm floating through the air. I still feel water against my skin, though I know I have to continue holding my breath. And hold it I do, helpless to return to the surface. Part of my mind just can't wait until I'm awake. But my body's being sucked down now. Over the edge of the shelf, a sheer wall of granite towers in front of me. About 50 feet, the pulling stops. I float motionlessly in front of a massive hole. In the perfect clearness of the water, I can see the hole is a cave. It goes far into the rock, further than I can see. I notice multiple tunnels in the sides and know these too. I then get a feeling of dread around me. My lungs burn. I feel the pressure of 100 feet of water on me, squeezing my skull and threatening every profanity in God's way. I now try desperately to wake myself up. Wake up, I whisper in my dreams. Open your eyes. See me. A voice bursts from the mouth of the cave with a colossal surge of water pressure. The air explodes from my chest and my eyes bulge. See me? Like I see you? It says. My eyes open to the morning light floating above my bedroom. Now I've had the same dream 3 times since I started diving in the lake. It stuck with me. I hated how it tainted my subsequent dives and made me dread exploring the one unseen zone. That would have to end. I'd see for myself if it is all just in my head. That Wednesday, I stood on the edge of my pier like I had in my dream. The water's not visible. It was grey and calm and sloshed lazily against the pier's wooden supports. The sky was cloudy. It looked as though it might rain. I've always enjoyed diving in the rain. Something about the water in the sky meeting the water of the sea or ocean gives me some kind of calmness. I check my tank. It's full. I was planning on doing a 2-tank exploration before retiring the dive. Now, I went to the lake. I get a few feet below the surface and visibility is low. Slip. I'm instantly annoyed. To be fair though, it wasn't as bad as the first time. I could see maybe 20 feet in front of me, but I'd hoped it'd be a lot more than that. I was hoping for the invisible clarity of the water in my dream. This wasn't anything, but it made the prickles of dread I'd tried to ignore force themselves into my consciousness. So I swam towards the edge of the underwater cliff, easy to locate. An abyss looms ahead. I floated to the edge, crossed myself and leapt off. The slit cleared quickly once I'm on the other side of the muddy drop. I descended slowly, my hand never leaving the sheer wall of the rock at my side. I checked the depth gauge, 40 feet, 50, 65. A fissure developed in the granite wall. It widened as I sank down. I did my best to avoid connecting it to the memory of my dream. 100 feet. I see the opening widening. Everything in me said kick my feet and swim back up. Forget about this part of the lake. I had miles upon miles of lake I could be exploring. There was no need to see this. But my body overrode the procrastinations of my mind and protests. And 96 feet down, the mouth of the cave yawned before me. There's nothing I can do but stare with disbelief at the gaping hole in the rock. I had no reason to know of its existence. Dreams shouldn't always be followed. They don't convey new information. I'd never been here before. Well, never physically. My mind reminded me. I was helpless to ignore the message in the little reminder. No, I'd never been there physically, but mentally, I had, somehow. Just do it, I thought. See what it's about. The hatred I felt for myself for betraying my better intentions is now profound. I knew I'd obey the betrayal. Curiosity always won out of everything on me. I aimed my body at the center of the cave and kicked. I switched my headlamp on. The ghostly beam illuminated the lifeless walls. 100 feet in, I thought back to all the warnings I'd heard from diving instructors. Never explore caves on your own. You will die, and they emphasize will, as if it's a foregone conclusion. Like the person to discover a cave always dies, like it was a law. By now, I'm already 200 feet in. I would have sworn the water was brighter. I'm now 300 feet in. I realized it's really brighter. Brighter probably isn't the word. Clearer better suits it. Maybe becoming invisible, my mind interjected. 400 feet in. I can't deny it. The water's invisible. I look back at the mouth of the cave. The enormity of it really struck me. I checked my air. Half an hour. I left in 10 minutes. I'd have to swig for maybe 20 minutes and come back. Because if I didn't leave right away, I'd probably run out of oxygen. Don't go yet. Just a little deeper. More betrayal. My flippers pushed me ahead. The walls of granite were pockmarked here. It appeared as though each hole was a separate branch, disappearing deeper and deeper into the cave. I imagined myself getting stuck in the narrow walls, struggling and screaming until my air bled away. 500 feet. An expanse opens above me. Now I'd reached the top of a colossal chamber. Thanks to the invisibility of the water, even though it's dark, my light shone hundreds of feet down, never even reaching the bottom. Maybe it's time to turn around, my mind suggests, in the first hint of sense it had made. I obeyed, beginning to turn. Then, something in the water changed. I felt the pressure shift, as if something had pushed an enormous amount of water out of the way. I turned back towards the chamber. See me, like I see you. Before I even saw what made the sound, I screamed around my mouthpiece. The voice was so loud. It was a sound like nothing I've ever heard before, except for the dream. Except for my dream. My headlamp illuminated a creature of massive bulk and impossible proportions. See me? Paralyzed with primal horror, I trained my eyes to it. It shimmered and shifted like an erratic eel, at the same time remaining in the same place. See me. My head spun. The creature was the embodiment of expansion and collapse. Boulder-sized clusters of eyes would open, bulging outwards, popping out of existence like soap bubbles. Mouths gaped and inverted in the same instant, pinching into geometries that caused pain to erupt behind my eyes. See me like I see you? I reacted, screaming again. I was wasting so much oxygen. I look and I've only got 3 minutes left. See me like I see you, it said again. The water pressure shifted again with a hideous jolt. I felt my sinus and bladder and bowels contract and release. A coiled spiral of mess. Now this thing tore through the water in my direction before I could move. It had split into multiple thinner coils, penetrating my nose and eyes. Everything goes black. I felt the coils corkscrew behind my eyes, packing my sinuses. I screamed. I took a deep breath. Nothing came out. It's the end. My end. See me like I see you, it said again. The blackness evaporates. I gasp, expecting water to fill my lungs. No, there's no water, just air. I look around. I float in the chamber. The water's still invisible. The darkness is gone. Everything's bright. My panic, still near its peak, had gone again, and taken the back seat to fascination and curiosity. I could see the creature in front of me without experiencing any pain or disorientation now. I had underestimated its enormity. What I had seen before was only its topmost position. Below, previously hidden by the darkness, was a thick, tube-shaped body reaching 1,000 feet down to the cave floor, as its base was webbed. I try and blink. My eyelids flustered. I felt them turning. Something's drilling into my head. It repeats the same phrase. Impelled, I gaze at it. Its angles are foreign to me, as if it was occupying physical dimensions I'd never before encountered, dimensions my brain wasn't wired to process. The world drops beneath me. I stared at the creature against the backdrops of the dense stars and glowing nebula, the voice illuminating us. It was even harder to not see how big it was in this new setting, its bulk stretching beyond the line of sight. I now see a cosmos before me. I saw a planet with a yellow atmosphere. We travel, it says. Before I could register the words, the view had changed. We hovered under a yellow sky. I can see Mercury erupting below us in conjunction with liquid metal. The light beyond bathed my vision. It's a star. It burst to a supernova. Please, stop, I said. I could tell by the change in pressure that we're back in the cavern. The water was black and impenetrable. I couldn't see the beast looming ahead of me, although I could still feel its coils. What happened? What are you? Please. It said 2 for 1. I was very confused. A light burst in the direction of the creature. The coils pulled me towards it. Its flesh had actually split now, and I peered inside. It was filled with bones and carcasses. They looked as though there'd been parts that had been there for an eternity. A dull sense of realization bloomed over me. If I give you 2 people, will you show me how to explore? Yes. Okay, I whispered. I feel the coils straighten themselves out back towards the cave. I reach the mouth, eventually swimming far enough upwards that I'm at the surface. I feel no pain now, only a sense of emptiness. I pull myself to shore and look around. It was almost dark. I walked to the home, letting myself in, exhausted. Ignoring the confusion and hunger I felt, I go to bed. My dreams are of the stars. The next morning, I call Meg and tell her what had happened. I said that I wanted her and Penny to be a family again. It's been 8 months. Meg and Penny moved into the house with me after Christmas. Every night that I go to bed, I'm granted visions of the galaxies that I'll see. Everything I'll see. Penny and Meg had their first scuba lessons on our trip to Jamaica in January. They loved it. Once the waters warm up in the lake behind the home, I'll give them more lessons. I know they'll be amazed when they see the cave. As for what waits inside, they'll learn it too like I did. Difference is, I'll get to leave that cave while they become a very special part of it. What part, I wouldn't say, but I'll be long gone by then. I'll be exploring the stars. All I have to do is fulfill my part, 2 for 1, and I'm holding up my end of the bargain. So my friends and I went camping this week with my friend's dad, who took time off work so we could go up early. And we're trying to get some fun in before school starts in a couple of weeks. We went up to the campsite and set up camp just before jumping into our swimming gear, heading to the lake shore. We're playing around, tossing a frisbee around the water, when Jake went to drive for a frisbee that flew too far. He went underwater and we all stood by waiting for him. After a long time, we get into a weird state of confusion in unison, walking towards where he's drove. A couple of us called his name in uncertainty. Moose panics first, going into hyper lifeguard mode. He's flying through the water. We all kept looking towards him. The surface hasn't even calmed before Moose emerged, pulled a flailing jacket out of the depths. We all sighed, but Jack wasn't having it. He's kicking and screaming, throwing punches. One caught Moose in the eye, dropping Jake. They both go under for a second, popping back up. Jake was whirling around, twisting back and forth, looking for something. "Where is it?" he screamed, hands hovering just over the water. Moose re-emerged, a hand over his eye. To his credit, he didn't get mad, but he did keep his distance while the rest of us were approaching. "Jake, you right, mate?" Parker said. "Where is it?" "Oh, the frisbee's in the water, dude. It's fine. Let's get you back, okay?" "No, not the frisbee. The thing that grabbed me." "That would be me, moron," Moose called, massaging his face. I heard it. I heard it calling my name. "No, that was us, Jake. We thought you were drowning," McKay explained. Jake wasn't having any of it, though, still searching the water. He scrambled suddenly, but came back up immediately, stretching his arms out. Moosey saw it first. We all craned our necks, trying to see what they could. Moose walked near Jake. He's using his leg as a counterbalance. We all swim over to see what's up. Now there's a massive hole in the lake bed. It was so dark that it was visible as a black splotch under the surface. Visibility in the lake wasn't great, but it's clear enough to make out the beginning of a circle extending away in our direction. Wow, that's some hole, Parker whistled, leaning forward as if it would give him a better view. Not one of us dared go over the edge. Moose put his feet on the edge though. God, that's freezing, he said, toes wrapped around the circle. Jacob watched us get close but stayed back. I saw his expression change as he stared at the dark water. He was clearing water out of his ear while staring. "Did you trip into this?" I said. Jake nodded. I think something's in there. Instinctively, we all turned back to the hole and back up, despite his claim being ridiculous. The water was up to my neck. I got a sudden flash of fear that I'd be stuck. Let's go back to the beach, Moose said, probably relying on some lifeguard instincts, and we all wandered through the water, using our arms to bounce along the sand until we hit the shadows. Parker's dad was chilling on the dock, feet in the water with a book in his hand. "You guys ready?" he said, slipping the bookmark back into place. We got bored," Parker said, before anyone else could. So we loaded everything back into the car, going back to the campus uphill from the lake. Parker and his dad started the fire while the rest of us peeled potatoes, cutting meat into chunks. We had recovered from the lake incident and were having a good time and laughing. Jake was trying to laugh but had a hard time keeping his morale. Moose was testing the tenderness of his face every so often, and Jake kept on sticking his finger in each ear while twisting aggressively to get water out. After a while, as we wait for the fire to heat up, he stood up, turning his head to the side, shaking it. "You alright?" McKay said. We all turned to watch. He gets embarrassed. "Yeah, I've got to go to the bathroom." "Is he okay?" Parker's dad said. "Yeah, he tripped in the water and had a scare." Moose said Parker shot him a look and his dad looks worried. Luckily, a log collapsed into coals, distracting him. With our help, he scooped our tinfoil wrapped meals under his coat, building a bed around them. We sat around, kept talking for a while. Every so often we glanced off towards where the bathrooms were, but Jake didn't reappear until the food was ready. Parker offered to go look for him, but Moose said that he should just let him breathe for a while. He finally did come back though. Set the toilet paper on the table, eating the rest of the meal. By the time he's finished, it's dark. Parker's dad brought out the gas lamp to keep away the mosquitoes. No one dares ask Jake if he was alright in front of everyone. We all knew he hated attention. I hated to see him sit there and brood, and the mood of everyone stayed low too. We didn't want to get too cheerful and make him feel left out. It was a weird mood to balance. Finally, Parker's dad announces he's going to bed. That triggered the rest of us to get up as well. We were bored of catering the mood, I saw Moose pull Jake aside, but I went to my little one-man bed and climbed in. I was then woken up by a loud sobbing in the distance. The sound made me jolt out of my sleep. I was wide awake by the time I recognized the sounds. Pulling on my clothes, I unzip my tent and listen. The crying stops, probably reacting to my zipper. Whoever it was couldn't stop themselves. The source of the sound became apparent when I see someone standing in the trees near the table. Hands cupped over their ears, bending over as though they're hurt. I crawled out of my tent, stood up and walked over. Is it Moose? Was his head worse than he'd said? Of course it is Jake. He took one look at me, turning away embarrassed. Your head hurting? The water in my ears. He broke down in sobs. Do you need to go to hospital? He shook his head viciously. His expression happened when I mentioned it. I don't need hospital. Why, do you think I'm crazy? No, Jake, of course not. We're just worried. He muttered something and turned away, holding his head. I stood by awkwardly for a minute, not sure what to do. Should I wake up Parker's dad? Get him to lay down? Suddenly Jake yelled and took off into the trees. Jake, no. I yelled and ran after him. I was really hoping that yelling would wake up the rest of the camp. I didn't want to leave him alone in the woods in the middle of the night just to wake up Parker's dad for help. He kept yelling as he ran, and it took all my focus to keep his. It was all downhill, bushes, and we had come out of nowhere from darkness. I did a lot of last minute jumping and dodging. It was a miracle Jake wasn't hitting trees with how quick he was. We crossed a road that wound up the hill several times before I realised what he's doing. He's going back to the lake. I could see its calm surface reflecting starlight. The moon was behind the mountain we're on. Jake, go away, he said. He emerged from the trees into the parking lot near the lake, ran across the pavement. I tripped over something slamming hard to concrete. By the time I'd stood up, he was already wandering to water, disturbing the reflected stars. I got up, pursued him. I'm now seeing the dock extending over the water. I ran to it, and he used that to get me further out towards the water. He's beyond the pier by this time. I used my momentum and turned it into a flying leap, landing only feet behind him. I surfaced and he's next to me. His eyes were red, with the most hateful expression I've ever seen on his face. He grabs me by the shirt, then shoving me into the water. I tried yelling but ended up swallowing water. I tried to get my feet under me, but he was constantly shaking me. The sand wouldn't let me dig my feet in. My lungs are burning. I flailed around for air. I managed to claw one of his arms off of me, enough to get my feet down, head above the water. I get a half breath in before he shoves me down. I felt his legs moving along the lake bed and realised in a flash of terror that he's dragging me further. I kick and struggle, occasionally going up for air, but he kept pulling me. I lose track of time when I struggle, but eventually I felt ground give out under my feet. The water turns cold as I struggle for breath. I could taste the water turning sour. I threw up. There was nothing for me to kick off down here. I felt Jake pushing me further down. The burning in my lungs turns to aches as my limbs go lethargic. I heard my name underwater. I couldn't tell why. It sounded as though it's coming from down rather than up. It was soft at first. Then, the volume increased. The voice is muffled. The sound of bubbles accompanying it. I felt the bubbles brush my arms and legs. The underwater voice grows louder by proximity. Right in my ear, still muffled, and I'm struggling to understand it. Please come here. Get back here, please, come on. Come back, please. The tone turned from polite to intensive. I started to yell, hurting my ears. I had to cover my ears to keep them from hurting. As I closed my hands over my head, I felt my eardrum pop. Water now fills my eyes. Come back, get back here. It was as though they're the only words I can hear. It just kept going, and I couldn't ignore it. I tried to swim to the surface, but felt like it became more difficult to continue with every stroke. I couldn't get up for air. Then something grabs me. I tensed in my response, losing control of limbs. They're very weak now. I felt the grip harden as I'm yanked down at intense speed. That's when I broke into fresh air, rasping and coughing on instinct. Parker's dad held me away out of the water, standing on the lake bed, keeping me above the surface. Moose pulling an unconscious Jake towards the shore. I only catch a glimpse of him. Parker's dad took me to the shore. Moose performs CPR on Jake when we go to the beach. McKay's holding a cell phone dialing 911. It took a couple of minutes, but Jake does come around thankfully. He coughs up water and still held his head. An ambulance arrives and took Jake away. Moose came with us to contact our parents. Parker's dad stays behind so he can pack up the campsite and drive McKay and Parker home. Now I really don't remember much of the ambulance ride. My ears were ringing. I had a hard time getting the water out of my ears though. Every few minutes, my ear pops and develops into a liquid atmosphere. Everything around is muffled, like I'm listening underwater. It comes and goes as it pleases. The muffling sensation is so oppressive that I can't pay attention to the doctors or my parents. Now Moose and McKay have come to see me. It took so much energy and focus to pay attention to them through the liquid haze. Apparently, Jake's been attacking the nurse. No one knows what's wrong with him. But I do. I know what's wrong. When the liquid gets really oppressive and drowns out all the other sounds, I can hear them. The voices telling me to come back.
People like to warn you about the dangers of nature when you go camping, but that's not what you should be afraid of. No, not exactly. I went camping with my girlfriend in a place called Nightfall Forest. As you might expect from the name, it was dark and a foreboding place, with areas where the trees grew so thick that very little sunlight could get through their overgrown branches. Lacey, my girlfriend, and a biologist in training, went to study the ecosystem of a particular area of the forest, known for its unique fungi and bacteria. It was a lot of science worse than me, but a break from work sounded great, so I decided to tag along. She moved out, set up her instruments, as I set up camp not too far from the river. It was cool, a gentle breeze blowing over the camp as I hammered the last nails into the soil below. I had to admit it was nice. Nobody screaming at me about deadlines, no phones ringing every few minutes to complain about a product that I had no part in making. No cars honking at traffic or neighbours yelling loudly over the noise of their TVs. Nothing but the sound of the wind breaking through the trees, the trickle of water over rocks, and a few birds that I couldn't quite pinpoint in the dense foliage above. "What are you smiling at?" Lacey walked over and sat down beside me on a half-rotten log. It creaked under our combined weight. "I was smiling." "You were?" "Just enjoy the quietness and solitude, I guess. It's really nice out here, isn't it?" She grabbed my hand and kissed the knuckles. "Don't worry, you can get back to your keyboard tapping and smog-infested city in just a few short days." That night, we cooked a fish Lacey caught over the fire she built, and it struck me how little I knew of surviving in the wilderness. I was a city boy, born and bred. This was foreign land to me. We made love for the first time under the stars, what little of them shone through the trees above us, and then retired to the tent. I was beat. It was around 2 AM when a sound outside woke me. Dry leaves crackled and branches snapped. I looked over and Lacey was gone, and a brief moment I panicked. Something took her. A wild animal came in and was dragging her away right this second. A crazy old hermit was living in the woods, and he abducted her as penance for trespassing on his land. Endless scenarios ran through my head as a shadow appeared in front of the tent. This is it, I thought. This is where the old crazy hermit comes and murders me and rips out my liver for tomorrow's breakfast. The zipper began to rise slowly. Each metal tooth it ran over echoed through the tent, through my soul. Inch by inch it rose, getting stuck on something halfway. It was too dark to see. I thumbed around for something, anything I could to defend myself. All I could find was my pillow. All the tools were outside. God, I was an idiot. The zipper broke free of its snag, and I rose again, edging closer and closer to my impending doom. I grabbed my pillow and swallowed. At the very least, I could confuse the intruder and escape into the forest. If it was too dark for me to see, that meant it was too dark for them as well. I braced myself. 3, 2, 1. Jesus, you scare me. It was just Lacey. That's my line. What the hell are you doing? I had to pee. Did you have to pull the zip of the tent like a serial killer? I didn't want to wake you. Too late. I'm awake. Fuck me. I thought I was about to lose my liver. Your liver, what? Lacey got into her sleeping bag and fluffed up her pillow. Never mind. Well, now that I'm awake, I'm gonna go pee too. Have fun, she said. I made my way out into the darkness. Crickets chirps and the trickle of water over rocks continued, unabated. It was both unnerving and soothing at the same time. I finished my business, and as I turned to return to the tent, I froze. I wasn't alone. This wasn't Lacey trying to sneak her way back into the tent without waking me. There was someone standing in the trees, just a few meters away. It was too dark to see anything but a vague outline, but there was no mistaking it. There was a person right there. I could pick up a rock and hit them with it. Did they see me? I couldn't tell which direction the person was facing. They were just standing there, like a statue. I stood still, waiting to see if the figure could make a move. I was sure I could hear the beating of my heart in my chest. Why wasn't it moving? There was a cry in the distance. We both turned towards the sound, and then the figure turned to look at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness before it took off running. I scrambled for the tent and yanked the zipper down as hard as I could, forcing it to get stuck several times. "What are you doing?" Lacey asked, rubbing her eyes. I put a shaky finger to my lips and crawled into my sleeping bag. We waited, listening. There was another cry, fainter this time, and then silence. The thing was gone. "There was something out there," I whispered, unable to hide the fear in my voice. Lacey sat up. "What do you mean? Someone's out there? Who?" I shook my head. There was a cry, a scream, something, and they took off. I left out the part about the eyes. No need to worry her or make her think I was insane. I was a city boy. She would put it down to the unfamiliarity of the woods and not take me seriously. Camping virgin or not, the thing I saw, it wasn't human. The morning came without a wink of sleep, and Lacey went off to check her instruments. "Do you want some breakfast?" I called out. "I'll eat later," she said. The forest felt cold, unwelcoming almost, like the eyes were watching me from every corner. I stood up, thinking to join Lacey as she did her rounds, but then it dawned on me that I had no idea where she was. I was setting up camp when she put her stuff out. I was alone. I made my way over to the trees, where I saw the figure the night before. There were footprints in the mud, leading in the same direction where the figure ran off. I didn't imagine it. I followed them for a few meters before they disappeared. It wasn't that the mud ended, the footprints just stopped. I needed to think of an excuse before Lacey got back, so we could get the hell out of here. She could call me a chicken all she wanted, but at least I'd been a live chicken. But as the morning went on, there was no sign of her. I tried my hand at fishing, but all it brought was frustration and even more time to think. I tried to set up booby traps around the camp, but I was no Boy Scout. I didn't know the first thing about setting up a snare. Mud squelched under my feet and twigs snapped. How on earth did someone get so close to our camp without us hearing them? I couldn't make 2 steps without alerting half the forest. Several hours passed and no sign of Lacey. I bit my nails and wore a path in the grass beside our tent. Our phones were off and unable to receive reception out here, regardless. I knew my way back to the car, but that was it. If I went looking for Lacey, chances are I'd get myself lost and I'd be in even more trouble. But then a scream drew me from my thoughts. Lacey! I took off running. Getting lost didn't matter if Lacey ended up dead or injured instead. I pushed my way through the trees and branches, scraping my arms and face. There was another scream to my left. I turned, sliding in the mud before picking up speed again. The thing I saw outside the tent, it had her. It was all I could think. I slipped and fell several times, covering myself in mud, and then I heard a third scream, this time to my right. It was playing with me. I fell to my knees exhausted. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back, no idea where Lacey was or even if she was okay. It lured me out here, away from the camp, and now I could do as it pleased with Lacey. It was all I could think of, rational or otherwise. Lacey. I had to save Lacey. I stood up and ran in the direction I came from. At least the direction I thought I came from. Panic was settling in, and the forest looked the same no matter how far I ran. I could have been running in circles for all I knew. Maybe I was. My heart jumped in my throat. Footprints. I found footprints. If I followed them back, I could reach the campsite. I didn't miss a beat as I leapt over rocks and branches. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't scared. Then something moved in front of me, and I was on my back in the mud. Lacey! She looked at me confused. What are you doing? I extracted myself from the muck and grabbed her by the shoulders. That's my line. Are you okay? I heard screams. Her brow furrowed. I didn't hear anything. Are you okay? My head pounded. My chest ached. My brain was clouded with fear and confusion. You didn't hear those screams just before? They were loud enough I could hear them from the camp. I thought it was you. At that she smiled. Oh, you're so sweet. But I was just checking on my instruments. I didn't hear anything at all. Really? She nodded. You're probably just tired. You didn't get much sleep after all. Maybe. A sleepless night wasn't new to me, but it didn't explain why I heard something screaming when she didn't. Come on, let's go back to camp. I'll whip up a lunch special of canned beans and filtered river water. I attempted a smile that never quite reached my lips and followed her back. The forest was too quiet. My nerves refused to settle down. We ate lunch in silence. My muddy clothes hung by the tent, and all I could think was that I didn't want to be out here any longer. Camping wasn't for me. We were supposed to stay a few more days, but I wasn't sure if I could make it through the next night. Lacey. Yeah, she asked, stuffing her face with beans like she'd never eaten a meal before in her life. I want to get out of here. You want to go for a walk or something? No, out of here entirely. I want to go home. She snickered. Now you're just being silly. We just got here and I haven't finished my recordings. I felt bad, but I couldn't do it. Please. She looked at me. You serious? Yeah, I am. She considered it and then sighed. Is this about the screams? I shook my head. It's not just that. I know you didn't see them, but I saw someone last night. Right here, by the trees. I don't like this place. It's dangerous. Who's to say that tonight they won't return and murder us for real? I know you just wanted to do some research, but that research isn't going to be any good if we're both dead. I don't like this place, and I just don't. I just want to go home, please. She finished her plate of beans and set it down to the log beside her. You owe me big time. I couldn't help hide the smile on my face. Anything at all, you name it. Yeah, well, first I have to go get all my gear, I suppose. One day's worth of resolves is better than nothing. And you, sir, you get to break down the tent and put everything away. No problem, it'll be done before you know it. My spirits lifted. No doubt she'd give me shit the entire way home, but I could deal with that. Because we'd be alive and we'd be safe. That was all that mattered. I gathered our gear up in record time and was waiting when Lacey returned. We loaded up, I said an internal F you, and hope I never see you again, to the forest, and we went on our way. Did you manage to get anything from your tests? I tried to make conversations we walked so I wouldn't have to think about how creepy the forest was. The sun was setting and it would be dark soon. I hated winter. Early nights suck. No, not very much, nah. But it's fine, I can come out here and get some by myself. I scratched my nose and avoided looking at her. This was the right thing to do. I wasn't imagining things, I just wasn't. I'm sorry, I know you're looking forward to this trip. Look, if you're gonna mope the whole way home, just stop right now. I agreed to go back with you, didn't I? She did, yeah. Now stop fussing over it. Sorry. We walked in silence. The closer we got to the car, the more forest sprang to life. Birds sang, insects chirped, and the various creatures scuttled around the forest floor. The sound of several large animals stomping through the brush caught my attention. But I couldn't find them. As long as we didn't get in their way, we'd be fine. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, but the car was in sight. Just a few more meters, and we'd— Josh! Lacey, a few steps ahead of me, stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to look at me in the gloom of dusk, her expression unreadable. Lacey's voice called out my name. Only Lacey, standing in front of me, wasn't the name who called it. It came from the trees to our right. What the hell? We need to go now, Lacey said. She didn't wait for an answer and picked up the pace towards the car. Josh, wait! Something came running out of the trees. It was Lacey. What the hell? Lacey, the original Lacey, turned around. There were two of them looking right at me. What the hell is going on? Lacey, the other Lacey, was covered in mud. I took a step back as she ran towards me. Josh, it's me! My eyes flickered back and forth between the two of them, and my back pressed into a tree. I went out to pee last night and something odd grabbed me. This thing isn't me. I didn't know what to believe. They were a mirror image of each other. I don't know what that thing is, but I can tell you that when I went out to pee last night, I most certainly wasn't grabbed. The non-messy Lacey looked at me, her eyes wide. And yeah, I agree, we really should get out of here now. The messy Lacey turned and jumped before I could say a word. The two Lacys fell in the mud, scratching and punching and kicking. I ran over, grabbed the nearest one and pulled her off. There was a growl deep in the forest. I swallowed. That wasn't a deer. There was no time for this. It was getting darker and colder by the second. I turned to Lacey on my right. What did you get me for my 5th birthday? A red Matchbox car, she said without hesitation. I turned to Lacey on my left, pushing herself up out of the mud. What did I want but not get for my birthday last year? A rainbow cake with buttercream frosting, she said, flicking the mud off the front of her pants. Both were correct. The red Matchbox car was a pride of my childhood, and it sat on my dresser at home. Only Lacey knew about the cake I wanted last year, but due to a mistake at the bakery, never got it. This was insane. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but I can't be the only one who heard that growl just now. Lacey, both Lacys look at me. A second later it was on us. A featureless man, like something moulded out of clay, ran for Lacey. Its eye glinted in the darkness, and it barreled into her full speed, sending them both tumbling to the ground. A scream barely had time to escape my lips before it was all over. The clay man ripped out her throat. Lacey, the other one beside me, screamed. The yellow eyes turned towards her, and then looked at me. A mistake was made. There weren't supposed to be two Lacys. Something fucked up the process. The clay man grabbed my wrist and began to charge before me. It grew taller, matching my height. The watch on my arm began to form on his. The bare chest morphed into my shirt and jacket. Its blank face became mine. Lacey screamed again. I pulled the creature away from her and we fell, hitting the ground hard. Mud clouded my vision. Mud, so much mud. It was on everything, working its way into every crevice in my body. I extracted my limbs and swung for the thing with my face. It grunted and grabbed my hair, pulling me back down. It pinned me to the ground, and as it adjusted to bear its full weight down on me, I lifted my knee. I kicked with all my might, sending the other me tumbling to the ground. I grabbed Lacey's hand and ran blindly for the car. "Get back here," the man yelled in my voice. I ran as fast as I could, not turning back. "Hey, don't leave me here!" I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The car was just ahead. Lacey was dead. Was this my Lacey? There was no time to think about it. I pressed a button on my keys, relief flooding through me as I heard the familiar beep signifying the car was unlocked. I ran for the driver's side, while Lacey ran for the other. Our things could be replaced, but not our lives. I saw myself running for the car as I put the key in the ignition. Even more frightening than seeing the other Lacey in front of me was seeing myself. It was a perfect copy. It even ran with heavy feet like I did. The engine roared to life as the no longer clay version of myself jumped up onto the car. Lacey had her head in her hands, crying. I threw the car into reverse and watched as it went flying into the parking lot. I sped off, visions of myself running like a crazed Terminator with a limp in the rear-view mirror burning into my mind. Lacey said nothing as we drove the empty roads home. We both watched her, or at least the other version of her, die before our very eyes. But which Lacey was it? Did she even know herself? And now there was another version of me running around somewhere out there too. Both Lacey's truly believed they were the original. It keeps me up at night sometimes wondering. I've never seen anything to doubt that the Lacey sleeping beside me isn't the one that I met when we were 17-year-olds and stupid kids with too much time on our hands. But I could see it in her eyes when they argued. They both believed they were the one and only true Lacey. They both have the same memories, the same features, the same scars, the same feelings and emotions. Somewhere out there is another version of me. Did he return to the woods, lost and confused, or is he figuring out his next move? Waiting for the right moment to get rid of the imposter inhabiting his house, sleeping in his bed and making love to his girlfriend. Sometimes I wonder though, in the quiet of the night when the world is asleep, am I really me? If we have the same memories and we both believe ourselves to be the one and only true version, how do I know that I'm the original? Even if he does come and kill me and take my place, how will I ever know? I won't, and that's the thing that worries me the most.
When I was 19, my friend Jackson and I had decided that we'd go camping on our own for the first time in the woods. He had just turned 21 that summer. We're young and was killing for a good camping trip. Jackson was a bit of a privacy crazed individual, so he insisted on us sleeping in different tents. Despite my protests, he never changes his mind. The drive out to the camping spot was about a 3 hours drive away, but with Jackson's constant stops to restrooms, drive-thrus, petrol stations, and eventually attempting to force me to drive, which was unsuccessful in the end, added another 2.5 hours to our estimated time arrival. Now when we eventually arrive there, we get to a heavily wooded area, beginning the hour drive down the vacant dirt road. It only took half an hour to notice the strange things in the road. We had to swerve to avoid a deer carcass, stop and move a fallen tree, which didn't seem the slightest dead, and had weird arrows caved into it. Perhaps the strangest of all, however, was the large amount of barbed wire and nails spread across a short stretch of road. Now we actually get out, removing some of the objects, when Jason jokes, "Looks as though someone don't want us here." I laugh under my breath, but I start to think there may have been more to this. We arrive at the camp around dusk, begin to set up our tents. It took about 10 minutes to get mine up, and I decide to wander the ground a bit. I don't feel safe. But I've been here multiple times before with my parents, and never had anything strange or frightening happen here. I told Jackson I was going to wander a bit and that I'd be back soon. I walk the grounds when I hear a stick break behind a tree. My first thought was that, oh great, a bear. I stood still, almost certain that the furry beast would break into my line of sight and murder me, but nothing came. As much as I'd like to say I courageously investigated, I ran like hell. I got back and saw Jackson had his tent up and was starting a fire. I choked out on exhausted breath. "Jackson, there's a bear." "Of course there is. It's a hot spot for them," he replies. Now this comforts me, but then chills me to the bone. Had I survived a close encounter with a bear? Or was something more sinister out there? We began drinking. We're really messed up, we could hardly walk, but I hear the crackling of sticks again from right behind my tent, snapping me sober. I stand up shakily and begin walking the short walk to my tent with Jackson a couple of steps behind me. Now we must have looked ridiculous, but in that moment we were confident in numbers. Again, nothing was there. I circled the tree multiple times, but there was absolutely no one. Jackson clicked on the flashlight he kept on his belt and shone it everywhere. There was no one in our surroundings, as far as we can see. We don't hear anyone, so where are they? I stepped on something metallic and saw it was a freshly opened can of cream soup, 2 Diet Coke cans, and another tree about 3 feet away. The tree has fallen, but the rest aren't. Reasonably afraid, we decide it's best to sleep in the truck again. We fall asleep to the radio at 12:14 AM, and I slept pretty well until 3:47, when I hear a slight tapping on my window. Reluctantly, I open my eyes and slowly turn my head. It was the sort of feeling you get when you know whatever is there will inevitably scare you till the last moment of your life. You know, where all the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up. Now outside my window was a pale-faced person, tapping on my window ever so slightly with a long fingernail that looked as though it had been growing for 13 years. I screamed, but nothing came out. I tried to turn, but couldn't. Locked into a never-ending gaze with this thing. I shook Jackson awake, telling him just to drive. I think he saw the person outside my window, because he kicked into gear really quick. He turns the keys and thank God the engine roars to life. He barreled down the empty dirt road at insane speeds until we met with yet another fallen tree. Jason slams the brakes and we look at each other contemplating. We both know what we have to do. We kicked our doors open, hightailed it to the tree, using every muscle in our adrenaline-filled bodies, moving it with ease, before turning back to the truck. I reach my door. I see Jackson isn't on the other side. In the dim glow of the headlights, I saw Jackson lying in the road with a large arrow in his calf, preventing his escape. I then turned to run back to him, but it's too late. These people drop from the trees like monkeys, suddenly surrounding him, continuously smashing him with makeshift weaponry. I have to go. Before getting out of there though, I threw the biggest rock I could find and hit one of them. As I sped off, I see it dying in the ditch off the side of the road. I drove all morning into early daylight hours, not stopping until I reached a police station. I told them the whole story, and they seemed reasonably sincere, and assured me they'd checked the area. Jackson was never found though, making The only thing that proved we were there was our tents, which are strangely unzipped, but nothing is taken. I'm not sure what happened that night in the forest. I really have no idea. The sound of crackling sticks was someone dropping that broccoli can from the tree. And while we were investigating, 2 people climbed into the tents waiting. When we decided to sleep in the truck, they took a few hours to block off the road, or it may have already been so, and scared us to their trap. I think the only reason I'm alive is because I was on the other side of the truck where the archer couldn't hit me. I will never go camping again.
About 3 weeks ago, I drove my son out to a national park for a weekend camping trip. We took the 410 out from Tacoma into Mount Rainier, a place my dad used to take me when I was a kid. I wanted my son David, who's 2.5, to find the same joy of the wilderness as I had, but I'm quite convinced that he'll be terrified of forests for the rest of his life. When we arrived that Friday, the weather was crisp, and the first signs of spring had finally made themselves known. We walked, or rather I walked with David on my shoulders, for about 2, maybe 3 hours from the parking lot into a small, desolate camping ground with a pre-made fire pit. I'm not a very overproductive parent, so I let David wobble around for a bit, and I pitched the tent. Just as I was about done, and was getting ready to unload the 3-day supply into our tent, I heard David make some sounds from behind me. Now, I recognise these sounds immediately, as they're sounds he usually makes when he's excited about something. I turned around and saw him hit the grass, about 20 feet away, staring into the woods. More strangely, he was doing this thing he does when he's particularly excited about something, in which he's slapping both of his thighs repeatedly. I slowly walk over, trying to keep an eye on both him and the woods at the same time, but there was nothing in the tree line that I could make out. When I was finally by his side, I asked him what he'd seen, and to that his response was, Monkey man, Dad." He was smiling, still slapping his thighs, and as much as I tried to match his excitement like a good parent should do, suddenly the serenity of the woods was replaced by a sense of unease. I fixed my eyes on the tree line and peered in very, very carefully. It was such an incredibly strange thing for him to say. I picked David up, not wanting to leave him alone anymore, at least until I could regain some clarity, and walked into the tree line. I don't know how many of you are parents, but the last thing you want to do when you're taking a kid out for a fun weekend is frighten him. I mention this because the sensible thing may have been to hush him, to tell him to keep quiet for a while, but then I also knew that, realistically, this was just an imaginative manifestation. After a few minutes of scouting around with David on my shoulders, I returned to the camp. It was about 3:30, I believe, and so I made us some lunch, still keeping an occasional eye on that space which David had been clapping and yapping about a few minutes before. As much as I tried to forget it, I just couldn't. I'm not superstitious, I don't believe in aliens, ghosts or Bigfoot, but I suppose my parental instinct was simply in too much of a high gear for me to let it go. So as the cold sun was setting, I decided to ask David about what he'd seen. To understand my story a little better, it might be relevant to mention here that David had a mild learning disability, which has particularly impaired his speech. He can understand fine, but his ability to communicate has lagged behind somewhat. As I was getting to the fire, I asked him about the monkey man. I asked if it was a big monkey man. David thought about it for a second. He then laughed and nodded. I then asked if it seemed like a nice monkey man, and David once again giggled in approval. I wasn't really sure what else to ask. Nightfall struck, and on full bellies, I read a chapter from a book to him as he fell asleep in the sleeping bag. When I fell asleep myself, I had almost forgotten about the monkey man. I awoke in pitch darkness, but the fire pit was out. I reached out to feel for David, and panic struck me hard. He wasn't in the tent anymore. With only my underwear on, I stormed out, but realised it was too dark to see anything. so I dropped back into the tent and tore my flashlight out of my bag. I was screaming his name and all at the same time. With only the weak beam of a flashlight I didn't think I'd ever actually have to rely on, I shone it around in circles, still calling for David. For some reason, I ran towards a spot at which David had been so transfixed on in the daytime. I shouted names to the trees. As I trotted inwards into the pitch-black forest, I was too frantic to notice how badly my feet were getting scraped up by the bark and stone. After only about a minute of walking, I saw something that made me drop my flashlight and bolt forward. David was standing there, peering into the darkness, utterly still. I grabbed onto him hard and began to sob. Still clutching him tightly, I picked up the flashlight again, which had been idly beaming around, and scouted around, fending off the darkness. I couldn't see anything. As I carried him back, looking over my shoulder, I asked him what happened. He implied that he didn't know, and that he was too tired. David had a long history of sleepwalking. Last night, I locked up the tent from the inside with a padlock. I only got about 3 hours of good rest. David slept like a rock, despite my trembling embrace. The following morning, I cooked some eggs and bacon on the camping stove. David had no recollection of what had happened, and seemed content to continue the trip. I thought it would be incautious to shrug off last night's events as mere sleepwalking, especially considering the monkey man business, but also it would be a bit too silly to cancel the entire trip over it. Thus, I made a promise to myself that if anything else were to happen, I would drive us back to Tacoma at a moment's notice. The rest of the day was actually quite nice, and helped me take my mind off things. David was at first a little upset at not having the iPad, but eventually discovered that nature can be just as cool as pixels. We made some bark boats with faces on them and set them downstream, watched squirrels and listened to the birds. It was everything that I'd hoped the trip would be. At dusk, when the trees stretched long shadows across the grass, David was getting too cold and too tired to play anymore, so I decided we would spend the rest of the day in the tent. I had brought along this game where you have to trace the outline of a person with the electrode, and if your aim is off, it makes a funny sound. I don't remember what it's called, but David found it hilarious. It's dumb, but supposedly helps with motor development. At one of David's turns, he made an error and the little speaker made the sound again. David bellowed into laughter. What happened next filled me with a sense of fear that I doubt anything will ever match. From about 150 feet away, I heard the exact same laugh that David had made, only that it was much deeper. It was almost like when you record yourself speaking, then digitally you pitch it down. I froze, and this time, I couldn't hide my reaction from David. I could tell by his face that he heard it too. I lifted my finger up to my lips to communicate to him that we needed to be quiet. It was at this moment that I also noticed that the sun had completely set. I also noticed just how dead quiet the woods were. Every second felt like an eternal minute as we sat there in the tent, absolutely still, enveloped in the silence. When the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears finally ceased a little, I slowly leaned over towards my backpack to get my handgun out. When I turned around to face David again, I saw that he had picked up the electrode again. I sternly removed it from his hand and whispered with equal sternness, "Not now, David." Then, just as I'd said it, a low, broken voice whispered from literally inches from the tent,
"Not now, David."
The next thing I'm aware of is that I'm shooting wildly through the fabric of the tent in the direction of the sound. David is screaming, and as the gunshots ring throughout the woods, I hear the last remnants of something sprinting away. With my hand violently trembling, I opened the padlock and jumped out with a flashlight in my left hand, aiming the faint beam into the black nothingness. I grabbed David and stuffed everything within arm's reach into the backpack and ran. The way back was pure terror. There was not a second in which I didn't feel as if something was right behind us, ready to leap out from behind us, or the side of the trail, out from the darkness. The only thing I could say to David was, "It's okay, you'll get the iPad soon. Do you want the iPad?" Nothing ever leaped out at us, nor did I hear anything except for the rushing of wind and the occasional running of stream from the trail side. I was so out of it that even in the car, I kept checking the back seat just to see there was nothing sitting in it, ready to destroy us. I don't know how to explain to David's paediatrician what happened in Mount Rainier. I haven't even told his mother the full story, only that I thought someone came up to our tent and I fired a warning shot. Needless to say, David hasn't been the same since. He has been getting constant headaches, which might be from damage to his ears by the gunshot. I don't really know how to end the story, but one thing's for certain. Never ever take your kids out to Mount Rainier National Park. I am a 20-year-old man from Mexico. For some background, my family and I live in a certain state in Mexico. It's been known for drug violence, but my family never was really affected by it. So I unwisely thought that my family was immune to all that stuff. This incident that I'm sharing in this story totally awoke me from that fantasy. For some more information for the readers, I live in a multi-generation household with 3 parents, 3 siblings, my paternal grandfather, 2 paternal aunts, along with both of their husbands, 1 paternal uncle and his wife, 1 maternal aunt, she has a boyfriend that doesn't live with us, 1 maternal uncle, he's single, and 5 cousins. It's a pretty crowded house, but I manage, barely at times. Around 9 years ago, during spring break, some American friends that were also business partners came to visit my family. The American family composed of a father and his girlfriend, along with their 2 children. The kids' names were Mary, age 19, and Jerifo, who was my age at the time. I was fairly good friends with Jerifo, while Mary usually hung out with my older cousins. Our families decided to go on a camping trip out in the desert, but both our families were quite fond of extreme adventuring, so we wanted to find some remote location in the desert. The less people in the location, the more thrilling our camping would be in our minds. So me, my dad, my older brother, 2 cousins, Jerifo's father, Mary, and a few of my aunts and uncles set off camping. Once we found a wonderful camping spot, we set up our stuff. Me and Jerifo started getting bored sitting around the campfire, so without telling the adults, we decided to go on a little hike. A very stupid mistake, but we were nothing more than young 11-year-old kids. We just wanted to have an adventure on our own, and we thought we were invincible. Man, that didn't end well at all. While me and Jerifo were hiking out, we managed to get lost, not a surprise to anyone at all. As we were walking, we had totally lost track of where we were. We wandered helplessly around the desert, screaming as loud as we could, hoping that our families or some other campers would hear us. This kept us for around 3 hours, before we almost lost all hope of rescue. It was starting to get extremely dark and very cold. We suddenly came across some sort of human activity several yards away. Jerifo and I managed to pick out around 6 or 7 trucks. When we got closer, we could easily see around 24 men hanging around. From what we could tell, they were composed of a bunch of Latino and white guys. All the white guys had racist tattoos all over their bodies. One especially creepy dude had a skull tattoo on his face, while obviously other stuff was tattooed on the head of the other guy. The Latino men were similarly heavily tattooed, but I can't remember what they looked like now. The men were all armed with assault rifles. Me and Jerifo exchanged confused glances. The lighting was quite dark, but I could easily see that the Hispanic guys were handing over white bags to the white men. Obviously this was some sort of drug deal between the Mexican cartel and some American gang. I have heard several stories of such things happening, but I never imagined seeing something like that in person. Jerifo whispers to me that we need to get out of there before they saw us. We tried to scurry out as fast as quietly possible. This totally failed, as one of the Mexican gunmen spotted us and pointed us out to his buddies. The American and Mexican drug dealers started to shoot at us. Bullets were flying and crashing all around us. Our adrenaline kicked in and then we ran out the wind. I felt one bullet graze my side, but I kept running. Jerifo was shot in the stomach and he fell to the ground clutching his wound. He let out the most blood-curdling scream imaginable, the scream that still haunts me to this day. I knew that if I went to his aid, I would have been killed too, so I was forced to leave him behind. When I glanced back, a Mexican drug dealer dressed up as a trashy cowboy walked up to Jerifo. He then finished him off. No time for tears, I kept running. I prayed to every god that I could think of to save me. I was totally convinced that I was going to die that night, and my family would never find me. Slowly scumbling to fatigue, I glanced towards my right, and I spot a river 10 feet away. Knowing that this was my best chance of escaping my pursuers, despite the risk of drowning, I jumped into the river. I was never a stellar swimmer, but with the danger I was in, I suddenly became an Olympic swimmer that would have made Michael Phelps proud. The drug dealers continued to fire at me, but I eventually swam far enough away they gave up. I swam for another hour before I went back into dry land. Afterwards, I found a cave to settle into for the rest of the night. 3 hours later, I woke up to a flashlight in my face. For a second, I thought the drug dealers had found me again, but I was relieved to find out that it was simply just a rescue party sent to me by Jericho's family. I was airlifted to hospital and treated for my wounds. After my recovery, I explained what happened to my and Jericho's families. A sympathetic police officer explained to us that we probably witnessed a drug deal between the Jaris cartel and the Aryan Brotherhood. He then advised us to leave before the cartel tried any further attacks on us. Jericho's family called off the vacation and went home the next day. Not wanting further retaliation from the cartels, my own family moved to the Osakata state. So far so good, we've never had any trouble from the cartels again. Jericho's body was never found. I have no idea what happened to the dealers that attacked us that night, but I wish them the worst. I still have no contact with Jericho's family. To this day, I still get nightmares about the whole incident. It seems like this will be a chip on my shoulder for a long time. I have always been a bit of an adventure junkie, whether it's jumping from a plane at 16,000 feet, or a simple hike with a dear friend. I cherish it all for the thrills it provides, and the memories it forms. So when Martin, a friend of mine, came to me with a unique proposal, I made sure to listen. Martin is an anthropologist. For the better part of the last 25 years, his explorations have focused primarily on blue holes. Deep flooded networks of underground passages in some of the most remote places on Earth. He asked me if I would join him on his next adventure in place of his assistant who wouldn't be able to make the trip. I was skeptical, as I had little experience with scuba and zero in a cave environment. I was up for the challenge, but also a bit nervous about being dozens of meters underwater in tunnels about the size of sewer pipes. I was assured by Martin that it would not be that way, however. He said that the dive was an open cabin, and there were no plans to do anything that crazy. I accepted after a bit of deliberation, and completed the 6 months course geared towards cave safety diving. Soon after, I found myself on a plane bound for the Bahamas. I met the team on the island of Andros, and we headed out together. We arrived at the nearest parking lot and unloaded the equipment. After lugging some 30 kilograms of equipment for an hour through the muddy trails, we finally arrived at our oasis. At first glance, it was just a hole in the ground filled with water. I would have never guessed that the little pond plunged to over 60 meters down. The water level was about 5 meters below the lip of the cave, and was orchestrated in a manner reminiscent to a toilet bowl. An oblong, circular ledge made of limestone leading to a 5-meter drop in the water below. The only way in was to jump. We geared up, had a last-minute powwow, and then we took the plunge. There were 6 of us that entered the pool. In addition to Martin and myself was Javier, his right-hand man and close friend. Tank, a local guy who was an expert in the area, and the camera crew consisting of Rory and his wife Dawn. The alpha pool where we entered is over 60 meters deep, but from the surface it might as well be endless. Our primary headlamps illuminated only patches of the abyss. Crystallized stalagmites strutted the walls and ceiling like splashes in an Iron Maiden. The sides of the cave were dotted with narrow corridors and slim cracks in the wall. Some plant and algae specimens existed, but not many. We took our time on the way down, pausing and glancing around the area. Rory and Dawn filmed over the rock walls slowly, taking long wide passes to capture each nook and cranny. Javier laid the guideline, a coil of reinforced twine designed to make our path. Some 5 meters below us, a dense canopy of orange haze came into view. The coloration was due to the presence of hydrogen sulfide. Bacteria feeds on animals that fall in and drown, and excrete a foul substance. It's a poisonous substance that smells like rotten eggs, makes your lips tingle, and prolonged exposure can cause brain damage. On the other side of the hydrogen sulfide cloud was the oxygen-free zone. This is one of the main draws for anthropologists like Martin. The water at the bottom of most regions are completely devoid of oxygen. This means that the natural decomposition does not occur because bacteria and other microbes can't survive. Biologic material can be preserved for much longer than it would be on the surface. The cavern served as a sort of time capsule, and an anthropologist's gold mine. Martin touched down and began stewing around in the muck on the cavern floor, some 30 meters down. Around him, clumps of still and biologic compost stirred into an underwater torrent that soon clouded the area. His assistants joined him soon after, into the silt pile. The team ended up finding several well-preserved specimens, including the skulls and various remains of rock iguana, a leather black turtle, a wild hog, several types of small birds and fish, an albatross, and a bucara deer. The discovery of fish remains meant that at some point the cave was connected to another waterway. Perhaps it still was. By far the most interesting discovery, however, was one that was not immediately recognised. A large, almost basket-like bony plate with bumpy ridges along the outer shell. It was thought to be a large turtle shell, but the curvature of its shape made that unlikely. Unfortunately, it was entirely too large to haul back to the surface. Martin theorised that the shell belonged to an extinct mammalian creature known as a Glyptodon. Think giant Ice Age armadillo with the head of a wombat. If Martin's suspicions were correct, it would be the first remnant of a Glyptodon to ever be discovered in the Caribbean. The beast went extinct some 10,000 years ago, but the findings seem to bring that analysis back into question. Maybe Glyptodon stayed around a little longer than previously believed. We performed another several dives over the next few days, going deeper and deeper each time. We explored several side passages as well that branched away from the Alpha Pool. At one point we were travelling down a tunnel when we came to an extremely narrow fork in the road. The path to the left appeared to widen and branch out, while the one to the right appeared to narrow even further and continue downwards. Much to my disappointment, Martin chose a right-hand path, the opening that couldn't have been more than half a metre in diameter. Martin went through, followed by 3 others, and then it was my turn. I chickened out. Tank swung up behind me, and I just shook my head, gesturing for him to proceed. He made the OK signal and ventured through while I stayed behind. I meandered about in that area, twiddling my thumbs as I waited for the group to return. At one point, my headlamp caught something that sparkled on the cave wall. I moved towards it for a better look. I soon discovered it to be a small, rusted chain necklace with an intricate pendant attached. I took it and admired it in my hand, thinking maybe another member of the crew had lost it. It had no visible markings, and the style was one I wasn't familiar with. While I stayed, enamored with my discovery, something shifted in the corner of my eye. I turned to see an indistinct shadow slither out of sight, like a snake made from obsidian. It was impossible though. We were below the oxygen threshold. No creature could survive down there. At least not one that required oxygen. It must have just stemmed from my overactive imagination, left alone in the dark. That's what I chose to believe anyway. The team returned several minutes later, and we ascended back to the brim of the Alpha Pool. Something was different though. The other members of the dive had grown unusually quiet, especially after a successful dive. Even Javier, the most vocal of the team, was now stoic. Martin pulled me aside soon after, and I was informed why. We found something. He spoke the words without an ounce of his usual enthusiasm. Martin swallowed hard and glanced back to the rest of the crew. He went on to tell me how he had continued on in the narrow corridor, and after several minutes came to a dead end. It was there that he found it. In a pile of silt and muck, a vibrant strand of yellow polyester stood out. A pile of bones, wrapped in a black and yellow tattered garment, lay disemboculated on the chamber floor. These bones were different though. One look at the skull and equipment and he knew. They were human. Martin discovered soon after it was a fellow diver. Accidents like that are a grim reality of the profession. A lot of good lives have been lost to the depths of the blue holes. It seems that this man, whoever he was, suffered the same fate. His equipment was shredded, almost beyond recognition, but fragments of his dive suit and mask remained. He must have been down there for quite a long time. We talked over the discovery of the lost diver and took a moment to pay our silent respects. I told him about the necklace and displayed it around as well. Martin remained silent, not eating his dinner and remaining distant from the group. After a few minutes, I decided to check on him. No one's ever been that far before. He looked at me dead in the eye when he said it, a worried grimace on his grizzled cheeks. At least not that we know of, he clarified. Here I had been under the impression that the entire system had already been thoroughly explored and mapped out, but obviously that wasn't the case. I had no intention of returning into that godforsaken hole after the discovery of the deceased diver. Martin understood, but wasn't ready to call it quits. After all, there was one more passage that needed investigation. Martin theorized it to be the most grandiose of them all, a realm of submerged majesty, unscathed by human hands, one which, upon our return, would be named for us. I don't know why or how his words managed to convince me, but I soon found myself suited up once again, floating at the surface of the alpha pool. We performed the usual routine, and one by one my colleagues sank below for one more dive. We made our way back to the same tunnel as the previous escapade. This time at the fork, we took the left-hand path. Martin took the lead and stepped into the corridor. Each methodical kick he took stirred up a flurry of silt in the water. In no time, visibility in the tunnel became nil as our group stumbled blindly onwards. Crumbling debris rained down from the roof as we pressed on. I lost all sight and the rest of the crew. My heart rate began to climb yet again as a dense cloud spiraled around me. I clutched the guideline for dear life with my left hand, while the right moved along the tunnel wall. For several minutes I stumbled along blind in the fog, with only my sense of touch guiding the way. The porous rock then suddenly turned into a smooth, almost squishy sensation. I retracted my hand out of instinct, but curiosity drove me back. I felt along the wall until the squishy sensation returned. My hand began to clench, when suddenly the thing jerked. It felt like a wiggle away, and my heart sunk like an anchor. I hustled forward now with a sense of urgency. I bumped my head several times as I moved, but finally the dense fog dispersed and I emerged from the fog, only to be met with an empty chasm of endless black that stretched beyond sight in every direction. I looked back to see the murky tunnel from which I'd come, and the stone wall which dove dozens of metres down. Martin, Javier, Rory and Dawn were all drifting a couple of metres out, surrounded by nothing but the void. We regrouped and Martin removed the glow stick from his pack. He cracked it and stared for a moment before releasing his grip. The neon green candle drifted downwards further and further. We must have watched it sink for at least half a minute before it finally appeared to come to a rest at the bottom. By that point, it was only a single green pixel on a 4K display. It must have been hundreds of metres deep. The light then vanished entirely, likely snuffed out from the immense pressure below. We lingered for a moment, waiting for Martin to decide on a plan. A muffled squeal then escaped Dawn's lips, with a flurry of bubbles. We turned to Dawn to see her frantically tapping Rory and pointing downwards. We looked down and stared in disbelief as a glow stick appeared to begin to rise upwards from the bottom. I began to back away from the tunnel, now with my heart clamouring and my mind screaming for me to get the hell out. The light continued to ascend. It seemed to pick up speed as it went. It almost looked as though it had changed colour from neon green to a more blue tint. The light also seemed to be changing rapidly, as if bending from side to side. Dawn began to move towards me, but the rest of the team stared down, transfixed on the glowing spectacle. Others began to back away, one by one, as the light drew nearer. Eventually, Martin was the only one who remained. The light then reached him, and our headlamps revealed what it was. An eel or lamprey of some sort, maybe 2 feet in length and solid black. The blue light we had seen was imprinted along its belly, and it was some kind of bioluminescent display. The creature began to circle Martin slowly, as if curious. Martin appeared to be almost enthralled by the thing. It was without a doubt nothing like any creature I had ever seen, probably one which would be entirely new to science. The creature then drifted a few feet away from Martin and began moving in a strange motion. The best word I can use to describe it would be sort of a dance. It would pause briefly and then wiggle before pausing again. It repeated the motion over and over, staying true to its pattern. It was almost hypnotizing to behold. Despite the interesting find, I felt a dread begin to mount in my stomach. A minuscule flash then caught my eye from below. There was another one, and it was rising towards us again. Another flashed to life seconds later, followed quickly by another. Soon dozens of them began to emerge and follow suit with the others. The second soon joined the first beside Martin, and straight away began the same peculiar display in perfect synchronization with the first, and the third joined, and then the fourth. I looked down again, and my heart lurched in my throat. The entire air below us had begun to glow as hundreds of the things became illuminated and rose like a flock of dazzling blue embers. In the middle of them, though, a much larger light took form, sparkles of blue flashing upon it in a dazzling performance. Martin had finally seen enough. He turned to us, but it was too late. As soon as he moved, one of the eels lunged for him, coiling itself around his arm and digging into his flesh. Dozens joined in the attack within seconds as it turned into an all-out feeding frenzy. I heard Martin scream, but there was never a hope of saving him. The rest of us fled immediately, back into the dingy, silt-laden passage that had led us in. Dawn went first, followed quickly by Javier and then me. I moved as quickly as I could through the passage, blinded by the slurry, but caring only about the escape. Behind me, I heard the commotion as the creatures pursued us. There was a sudden burst of energy from behind. It was like an underwater sonic boom, followed quickly by the clanging of metal meeting rock repeatedly. The tunnel itself seemed to groan in protest, as what I can only assume was a burst of an air tank began to clang loudly and widely. I finally burst from the tunnel and re-entered the bottom of the alpha pool. I clawed my way frantically through the depths in a desperate bid to reach the surface. For a split second, I peered back over my shoulder as a muffled scream gurgled through the cave. I saw Tank there, frantic as a mass of slippery black serpents began to tear into him. Parts of his face were being stripped in seconds, leaving only skeletal remains in their wake. He ceased the struggle, and the mob enveloped him. "I'm so sorry, Tank." The words echoed in my mind as I turned and made a mad dash upwards. I felt them closing behind me as the smell of rotten eggs filled my nostrils. Several razor mouths gripped onto my leg as I swam, breaking into the red mist of the hydrogen sulfide. I thought I was done for when the mouths released their grips. As I turned to the putrid layer, I saw hundreds of vile glowing things staring back up at me. They continued their same dancing motion, hundreds of them in a perfect unison. A much larger shadow bulged from the cluster. It was massive, at least 10 times the size of its kin. It did not wiggle like the others. It drifted silently, bearing a mouth of hundreds of razor teeth and ornate, almost rune-like splotches of neon blue on its skin. Its mouth jutted from its head, as it can only be described as an umbrella of hooked teeth gleamed in the sparse cavern light. I could see its hunger. I could sense it, but something else too. The way it drifted was methodical, and the little ones cleared the path as it came through. It was almost like they were communicating. My saving grace was that its minions refused to cross the red barrier of hydrogen sulfide. I kept an eye on her, the large one, the brood mother. I rose to the surface and bust from the underworld and back into mine. Dawn, Javier and myself were the only ones to return from that dreadful place. The pain eats at me daily for those who we lost, and I wish we had never entered that godforsaken place. It's not safe. The cave itself had been sealed off, with no one allowed to enter it. The members we lost are still down there, forever entombed in the murky depths. I still don't know how those things were able to survive down there. The only explanation I can think of is undoubtedly the most troubling. The cave connects to another source of water. I've told this story to several sources, but none of them ever take me seriously. I'm done worrying whatever people will believe me. Some days I don't even believe me. I just hope for all our sake that the cave is not in fact connected to any other waterway like I believe it is. I can't imagine what would happen if those things ever got out. Needless to say though, I don't think I'll be planning another cave diving trip anytime soon.